everyone. I'm Erin. This is Mariah and Lisa. I'm super excited to be here tonight, so thank you all for coming. All three of us are grad students at CU Boulder's Masters of the Environment program. Instead of doing a thesis, we get to do a capstone project. So we were paired with Vincent Fujeta and Daniel Shea from Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, also known as CASR. And we did some research on neighborhood scale electrification. So here's the agenda for tonight. Once again, if you could reserve your questions for the end, that would be super. Oh, thanks, Lisa. That would be appreciated. So we have a lot of content to get into. All right. So we thought we'd start out with an audience poll. So for people that are in person, just raise the fingers that you think correspond to the right answer. For people on Zoom, I guess you can type it in the chat, but I might not see it if you want to participate. But okay, awesome. So what do you think will be Denver's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the year 2050 if current trends continue? We'll give you all a couple seconds.
We're seeing some threes, a couple twos, some threes and two over here, got one over here.
All right, some different. Okay, so the answer is 3, fossil gas, more commonly known as natural gas, but we'll be referring to it as fossil gas tonight. So now we're going to dig into Denver's climate goals in the surrounding policy context to explain why this will be the case if action isn't taken now. So Denver has a goal of reaching net zero emissions by the year 2040, but the problem is that their fossil gas emissions are projected to remain the same as they are now through the year 2050 at 1.9 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So from now until that year, they're expected to just completely plateau. And that by that point in time, as you can see on the chart, fossil gas will make up the vast majority of Denver's emissions. Everything else listed here is expected to get cleaner over time as the grid continues to be decarbonized, but fossil gas isn't something that gets cleaner over time, so we need to replace it with something else. So that led our team to a key question. How can CASR and Denver help manage a transition off of fossil gas to reduce emissions and costs while also ensuring equity? Luckily for CASR, there's been plenty of action at the state level, and HB 241370 in particular is the bill that's actively been driving our capstone forward. So this bill requires the utility Xcel Energy to partner with Denver to explore neighborhood scale electrification pilots. And these pilots should be getting majority buy-in from the participants. Yep. But before we get into all of that, we wanted to give just the most high level and briefest overview of our current fossil gas system. So as most people in this room know, Xcel is the primary electric and gas provider for Denver. And their role is to produce, transmit, and then distribute fossil gas to their customers. 60 to 70% of this gas is used for space heating purposes. And so HB 241370 is targeting this distribution portion of the gas system in the hopes of lowering demand on the customer end so that we can then decommission the distribution branches of those pipelines and hopefully start the transition off of the fossil gas system as a whole. But now to get into the actual title of our presentation, we're going to look at what neighborhood scale electrification actually is. So this is an approach that seeks to electrify entire neighborhoods or areas all at once, rather than going about it in a more randomized, piecemeal fashion. So to give an example, hopefully you can see behind my head. On the left-hand side of this graphic is the way that we've been approaching electrification. You have 2 people in each neighborhood that electrified, 2 people that are still using fossil gas. Both of these neighborhoods are connected to 2 different branches, I'm saying the number 2 a lot, 2 different branches of the gas system. And because you still have people in both neighborhoods using fossil gas, the utility and all of its customers have to continue to invest and put money in both of those branches. The bottom right-hand side is what we're aiming for. So that entire neighborhood electrified all at the same time. And that orange X signifies not only that branch of the pipeline can be decommissioned, but it also represents major cost savings for those 4 customers. So this approach works really well in areas where there's old infrastructure that's expensive to maintain or replace, and new or planned developments that haven't yet connected to the gas system, and also where people are interested in electrifying in the first place. Yep. So I just mentioned some of the benefits of this approach. Our team also identified all of these other co-benefits, and there's probably a few more. But the one that we really wanted to highlight for you all tonight is this last one. So neighborhood scale electrification can help CASR and Excel tackle the energy burden. As more and more people are electrifying, the costs of maintaining and investing in the gas system get spread across fewer and fewer customers. So that means higher utility bills for the people that are left behind. Since it's mostly higher income households that are able to electrify right now, this approach would help CASR and Excel prioritize those lower to middle income neighborhoods so they don't get stuck with the rising costs of the gas system. Now, our team explored 2 different pathways to get to neighborhood scale electrification. One of them being building by building electrification, which entails just taking all of the systems and appliances in a building and electrifying them. So it's mainly air source heat pumps as well as heat pump water heaters. The second pathway that we looked into are thermal energy networks, or TENS. And this is the pathway that we're recommending CASR prioritize in these future pilot projects. So TENS connect a group of buildings to a shared clean heat resource, like one of the ones listed here. And they do this using underground pipes and heat pumps to exchange heat between buildings and in and out of buildings. And since data centers have been a very popular topic among environmentalists, we wanted to focus on that in this graphic. So one potential solution to the data center problem is to connect them to a TENS. They produce tons of waste heat because they're constantly running 24/7. But connected to a TENS, you can take all of that waste heat, convert it to useful heat, and then funnel that heat to other buildings on the network that need it. So this would be especially helpful in the winter when our residential fossil gas demand hits its peak. And the graphic is being modest, probably for simplicity's sake, but the reality is that if you connect a data center to a TENS, it could provide the heating for hundreds, if not thousands of homes. So we're not advocating for more data centers, but this is a way to get around it. But how do TENS compare? As of right now, fossil gas on average is about 3 times cheaper per unit of energy than electricity is. So heat pumps have to make up for that cost differential through their efficiencies. And TENS do this especially well. That's because TENS typically use ground source heat pumps that are able to tap into the Earth's stable underground temperatures that are around 50 to 60 degrees. Non-networked air source heat pumps, on the other hand, have to work a lot harder to bridge a much larger temperature gap between the outdoor air, especially in the winter months, and the desired indoor air temperature. But ground source heat pumps only ever have to make a 10 to 20 degree jump, so that raises their efficiencies. If you connect a ground source heat pump to a TENS, they can reach efficiencies as high as 600%. And then compared to a non-networked air source heat pump at around 300% efficiency, and then a regular gas furnace at about 99 to 100% efficiency. So these 2 charts are showing when heat pumps become the more cost-effective option versus a gas furnace. The left is showing a non-networked air source heat pump, and then the right is showing the geothermal network comparison. And both of these are plotting the same variables. So the electricity prices are on the left axis, the gas prices are going along the top. Red is bad, that means the heat pump costs more. Green, good, it's cheaper. So starting with the left, as you can see, it's pretty split between red and green. So when electricity prices are higher and gas prices are lower, the non-networked air source heat pump will be the more expensive option unless electricity prices fall or gas prices rise. But on the right side, as you can see, the graph is mostly green. So even with the higher electricity prices and the lower gas prices, geothermal networks have such incredibly high efficiencies that they more than make up for that cost differential, and they're the most cost-effective option most of the time. So now I'm going to hand it off to Mariah and Lisa to walk us through some of the deliverables.
So yeah, I'm going to talk about our deliverables that we created for our partner at Kaiser. So we did a lot of research. We looked into a lot of policies. We created some reference documents for them to look at. But what we're going to talk about today is the neighborhood profiles, electrification case studies, our home energy survey, and are we going to talk about educational materials? Yes, we are going to talk about educational materials. So for Kaiser to effectively work on neighborhood scale electrification in Denver, we really need to understand Denver's personality. And we started by creating 2 scoring systems. The first is our need-based scoring system. We use the demographic scores from Denver's EnviroScreen system, which if you're not familiar with it, just takes a whole bunch of variables and gives different areas a score of their environmental risk. So we just took the demographic portion of that scoring system and combined it with an extreme heat vulnerability score from the census, the sensitive populations and environmental exposures data we used was from Colorado's equity score. And then we used just the rate of fossil gas usage in those neighborhoods. And if you're familiar with Denver, you'll recognize the inverted L shape that basically shows where there's been a lot of historical marginalization and disinvestment in those communities. And the other thing we wanted to know is what kind of project would be most likely to succeed in this part of town. So we looked at population density, with a higher population density being correlated to more success. I dropped that information. Wow, that's okay. I'm just gonna roll right along. Building types and land use, mixed use is more successful for a thermal network. A purely residential neighborhood is gonna be more successful with building by building electrification. The presence of industry, groceries, hospitals, and schools provide heat sources for thermal networks. And the age of the housing, older housing tends to be less efficient and also is correlated with an older gas pipeline system. We don't have access to Excel's gas pipeline information, so we had to use some proxies for that. So using that, we picked 5 neighborhoods to do a really deep dive on. I'm going to start by talking about Denver's Westwood neighborhood, which is a neighborhood that I have a strong connection to because I used to teach preschool there. So as you can see, Westwood is right in that inverted L shape. And we categorized Westwood as being a good fit for a thermal network because it has high density. There you go. And because of the presence of certain sources of heat, but there are also some barriers, which we'll talk about in a minute. And Westwood is a Colorado creative district. There's some beautiful public art, murals, strong Latina culture. 37% of this neighborhood is under the age of 18, which is the second highest in Denver. And what does that mean for electrification projects? Westwood's young population is particularly vulnerable to the health impacts of fossil gas, which are things like asthma and respiratory issues, with carbon monoxide moving all the way up to death. But let's just go right past that. But 80% of Westwood's residents rent their homes, and that's a huge barrier for any kind of electrification project. Westwood residents have lower than the Denver average income and higher than the Denver average cost burden, which cost burden is when you spend 30% of your income or more on housing. And finally, 2/3 of the homes in Westwood were built prior to 1960. This means that those older homes probably correlate with an old gas pipeline infrastructure, and the time could be right to replace those old pipes with something different. So we reached out to some professionals to get their take. Energy Outreach Colorado does whole home retrofits for people who qualify based on income as well as a health condition such as asthma. And what they are really good at is finding contractors who are comfortable working in this space, which is a challenge, and explaining what home electrification is to their clients, making the process as smooth as possible, making it as economical as possible. And we think that they would be a great partner for these kinds of projects, but they shared with us that they have never successfully helped a client who rented their home. And this is for a lot of different reasons. People who rent don't even apply because they think they won't qualify. If they do apply, their landlords can't be reached or refuse to give permission for the upgrades to their homes. So this is a huge barrier to electrification projects and something that Denver really needs to think about going forward. And we also talked to Extreme Community Makeover, which is a community organization that works within Westwood as well as some of Denver's other neighborhoods. They are really good at community outreach, and what they taught us is that communities like Westwood get a lot of asks. There are a lot of people in there trying to be helpful, but it can be overwhelming for the residents. So organizations that want to get input from people in these communities really need to be thoughtful about giving people choices in if and how they engage. If someone doesn't answer the door when you're doing door-to-door outreach, it doesn't mean they're not interested. They might be at work. They might think you're ICE. So leave something behind so they can reach out again and get back to you. And then successful engagement in communities like Westwood also takes advantage of local expertise. A lot of the organizations that work in Westwood hire locals known as promotores, who serve as a bridge between the community and the organization and really can leverage deep community connections. And this definitely helps get buy-in. And then finally, for each neighborhood we profiled, we found an existing pilot that we thought could be a model for something successful for that community. In this case, we chose the Eversource geothermal pilot in Framingham, Massachusetts. And this is a utility-led geothermal network pilot. The geothermal network is the green line in the map there, and all of the participants are the little red houses. And so the utility paid for the network infrastructure as well as all the appliance upgrades in people's homes. And the participants just pay a moderate subscription fee for access to the network. Some things they did really well were before they started this pilot, they got a letter of interest from every participant. And that's really important for Colorado because while our bill doesn't absolutely require 100% buy-in, it really prefers it. And then this is a model for a whole new financial structure for a gas utility. They can serve thermal energy instead of gas and still have a successful business model. And could it work in Westwood? Maybe. Colorado has good geothermal resources. There are some other sources of heat in Westwood as well, but connecting with the building owners could be the biggest challenge here. The thing is, the way the gas utility, the gas infrastructure is set up, if you can get even just a few buildings on the terminal end of a gas pipeline, you can still make a big impact by being able to remove that piece of pipeline from the system. And that's what we think CASR should prioritize in a community like this. And then we're going to talk about the complete opposite of Westwood, which is Central Park. So Central Park, if you're not familiar with the history, the Denver's airport used to be there, the Stapleton Airport, and Central Park is considered one of the nation's largest and most successful infill developments. A lot of thought went into planning this community. There is a master plan with a focus on sustainability. People in Central Park tend to have higher incomes, but that comes with also a very high cost of living. So there are still many residents in Central Park who experience cost burden. Some areas of Central Park actually technically qualify as food deserts because they are more than a mile from the nearest grocery store. What does electrification look like in Central Park? Because of its history as an infill development, most of the houses are the same age. About 15 or 20 years old, which means almost all of them will be reaching the end of the life of their first set of appliances. This represents a really big opportunity to do a group buying scheme and capitalize on economies of scale to get a neighborhood to electrify all at once. There's a lot of ongoing development in Central Park. Grocery stores would be a great start. And if we could get in there as those developments are being put into place, we could prevent a gas system from being connected in the first place and then not have to go back and take it out 20 years later. But every resident of Central Park pays a subscription to the Master Community Association, and many of them pay an additional HOA fee. So a lot of them, their initial reaction could be, is this just another thing I have to pay for? We spoke to a community organization, Central Park United Neighbors. There is really high engagement in this community. Out of the 78 Denver neighborhoods, Central Park represented 14% of our survey responses because of how many people responded when our connection at CPUN sent that out in their newsletter. The community members care about sustainability and affordable housing. Those were both built into their community plan from the get-go. And they recognize the impact they have on surrounding neighborhoods. So when the airport closed, a huge employment hub for neighborhoods like Park Hill closed down as well. And Central Park realizes that when they take city funding for projects within Central Park, it has an outsized impact on neighborhoods outside of Central Park, which don't have the resources they have. Sometimes they advocate for that money going elsewhere, but because of their resources, we think that there could be an opportunity to do a really successful pilot project here that could show the potential to other neighborhoods. So our case study for this is the One Java Street development in Brooklyn, New York, which is such a cool building. This is a 5-building residential and commercial development. It's built to be completely net zero once the grid cleans up, but for right now, all the hot water and all of the domestic heating comes from a geothermal system. There's like 300 boreholes. They're all beneath that building in New York because of how dense it is. They had to keep it all within the footprint of this building. And because of New York laws, they could only build those boreholes 499 feet deep. So anything 500 feet or more is regulated as mining, and it's much stricter. It got some funding from the NYSERDA PON 4614 program, which funded a lot of different pilot projects to see what worked and what didn't throughout New York and some other parts of the East. And then it provides 800 housing units. 30% of them are set aside as affordable, which is really important within New York. So there's a lot of things this development did really well. One thing they did really poorly is communication with the surrounding community. If you look at the Reddit, the subreddit for this neighborhood, there are a lot of complaints about ongoing noise that the residents weren't told about, after hours noise. There was a transit ferry that closed for 18 months that people used for commuting. So one thing we can learn is going forward, we can really prioritize communication with residents and impacts on transit. And then could it work in Central Park? I think yes. This would actually be easier to do here than in New York because we don't have the space constraints that New York has. We wouldn't have to keep our boreholes all within the footprint. We could use parking lots and spread out and get even more out of it. The park and rides that RTD built with the Fast Tracks programs sit empty a ton of the time. This picture is from a business day on a Monday. So if we rebuilt this as transit-oriented development, it could boost ridership. There are easy connections to employment hubs like the airport in downtown. We just want to keep the residents in the loop. And we need to know if the residents want these projects at all, which leads me to Lisa and our home energy survey.
Okay, so we surveyed Denver neighborhoods to better understand residents' attitudes and knowledge about electrification. And so we received nearly 200 responses, with the majority being single-family homeowners. And this is quite significant because lots of pilot projects focus in on single-family homeowners, meaning that our survey closely aligns with successful projects done in the past. But it's really important to note that our survey is not representative of the entirety of Denver. For instance, we received really limited responses from neighborhoods like Westwood, which have a high proportion of renters. So it's really important for CASR to focus in on renters moving forward. So our team engaged attitudes towards electric appliance adoption, particularly residents interested in switching their natural gas appliances to electric alternatives like induction stoves. And so about 50% answered that they would be very interested in switching now. But when asked if the full cost was covered, that number then jumped up to 65%, showing that cost still remains one of the biggest barriers to implementation. But for the 50% of respondents that said that they were not interested in switching now, the top two barriers were really clear. First being high cost, and second being reluctance to replace their current appliances before their end-of-life use. And so what would help these residents move forward? Well, our survey found that mostly they needed financial incentives and information about cost savings using things like community events and workshops where residents can ask questions and learn from us directly. And so that takes us to our educational materials that we made to help residents move forward. And so we made materials adapted to different audience members, property owners, renters, and community organizations. So for property owners, the focus was on healthier buildings, greater cost savings, and higher property values. We listed steps to take before, during, and after electrifying, and included pictures of different systems, appliances to consider electrifying, and shared links and access to rebates and incentives that they could use from the city. For renters, the focus was on actions that they could take on their own and more about advocacy. And so they listed steps such as, what does it mean when you switch over to another appliance like an induction stove, or emphasize community organization and advocacy, and also shared contacts and resources for renters' rights. And for community organization, the focus was on building community trust and shaping programs to really center around residents. And so we helped familiarize CBOs with the electrification process and benefits for residents that they can share, and emphasize the important roles that CBOs can play for this transition, and included ways of starting conversations with these residents. And so for the next few slides, we'll just show you some examples of the materials that we made. First being brochures. And so, so this is for CASR to take when they have these like outreach events, like workshops, events, or if they go door to door, they can leave them with the residents. The next are social media flyers that they can post on Instagram and Facebook and just on their website in general. And then these are our take-home flyers. So these are more resident focused. And so these really teach them the benefits of electrification and what they can get out of it. And so this really synthesizes our entire project into learnings and considerations. And so here are some of the big takeaways from what we've found. So the first is to adopt TENS where feasible because they have a really big high impact. They're able to remove clusters of users all at once, streamlining coordination and allowing the utility to retire gas assets all at once. They have a big load diversity, so they stabilize demand by reducing electricity use, and that reduces seasonal peak demands and lowers the need for new infrastructure build out. The third is that they're really cost efficient because they capitalize on economies of scale, and their diverse load produces high efficiencies, which produce long-term savings for residents. Our second recommendation is to consider all costs when setting up these pilot projects. And so the financial modeling should include 3 different costs. The first being upfront costs. So these are the infrastructure upgrades, weatherization improvements, and home retrofits needed to enable electrification to move forward. The second are avoided infrastructure costs. So these are the savings from not having to invest in new or upgrading gas pipelines, and instead those funds can be used in other things like weatherization. And the third are external costs. So these are social and environmental costs of not electrifying. So the continued use of fossil fuels, which produce health impacts. And the third focuses around policy reforms. And while CASR is not a policy-making entity, it holds a lot of influence, especially as other municipalities look to Denver as a climate leader. So the first is that current projects do not require a 100% buy-in, but they strongly recommend it. But this can be a barrier to implementation. So we recommend lowering that threshold to a 2/3 majority. The second is to protect renters. And so banning those pass-through costs for electrification retrofits and requiring contracts to be made before the project starts. And the third is requiring Xcel to share that pipeline information so that these projects can get started. And our fourth and last recommendation centers around community engagement best practices. And so the first is to partner with trusted community-based organizations like local nonprofits, faith groups, and neighborhood associations like we talked about, who already have that relationship and built trust with residents. The second is that the language really matters, and so adapt those materials to fit the various community needs and simplify the language so that it reaches a broader audience. And the third is to start early, stay consistent, and follow through. So bring in those residents and key stakeholders early on during the planning phase and maintain that ongoing dialogue throughout the project.
At the end of last month, Denver and the other municipalities that are participating in HB 241370 have reached an agreement with Xcel on how to move forward. And now they'll start evaluating potential pilot projects. Our research should form the groundwork to help them choose projects that have a high probability of success. This is actually an error, which I forgot to correct before we got here. There are several deadlines moving forward through this bill. A project could be chosen as early as 2026 if it has 100% buy-in. They could choose a project that has majority buy-in if they don't find one that has 100% buy-in. So ignore the July of 2028 number, it's not real. And then Denver's going to continue to be a leader in this space. These projects are going to provide a model for other municipalities that are looking to decarbonize. And we're going to make the answer to our opening poll change. And thank you very much. Any questions?
I was wondering if you looked at any of the potential co-benefits of putting local distribution electricity lines into the gas pipeline systems that are no longer used, because there are electromagnetic barriers right now to it, but it could be overcome, and that would be a strong driver to pull more electrification happening, because it improves the resilience of your electricity system even while climate change is making outages more and more common.
Like that's upside down. like undergrounding the electricity lines and kind of replacing the gas infrastructure that way. We did not really look into that. I mean, we in our energy markets course that all three of us are in, they were saying that Excel wants to spend 8 billion, 7 billion.
Some really large money.
Yeah, for wildfire mitigation and some other things. And I think that does involve undergrounding the electricity lines. So that is something that we will maybe include in our report, because that's a really good thing to point out.
One thing we did find, which we were hoping wouldn't be the case, the old gas lines are not suitable to directly transform into a thermal network. So it's possible that they might not be suitable to directly transform into an electric pipeline as well. But if we're going in the ground and replacing stuff anyway, that would be a great time to be undergrounding our electric system.
And just again, as a reminder, I'm thrusting two mics at you all. One is from people in Zoom, and this is for the local. And I'd like to apologize for the scratching noise. I think it's static. As I walk around and move, my clothing builds up a charge. I assume that's what we're hearing. So I just not move, I guess. But you know,
personality.
Yeah, I have a electric personality.
So this is a related question to the one that just came up, which is, do you think Excel will also, while saving money by cutting off gas lines and abandoning them, incur costs to support the electrification of these high density neighborhoods? For instance, I have a very good friend who recently put in a EV charger, and his house only had 50 amp service because it's old. And so he had to pay to get the extra, 150 amps added. So he had 200 amp service. But things like that might also incur cost.
Wants to take this one.
I think over time they will. Excel is also saving money by not funneling that money to upgrading that gas pipeline, so they can use it for other things like those EV chargers, batteries, other programs.
Sorry, you're very good.
But maybe not initially. Do you have anything to add? Yeah, I might be totally missing the point of your question. But since Excel loves to spend money so they can make more money back, if they have to incur higher costs to build those thermal energy networks, which would be more expensive than doing the building by building electrification, at least upfront, if they get the guaranteed rate of return at like 8 or 9%, then I think that's the confusing part to me still about this, is why they wouldn't want to if they enjoy spending too much money on their capital assets. So I haven't figured that out.
Yeah, but the homeowner, as a home, I think he's saying like, I'm a homeowner, so the circuit breaker, if you have to change all the stuff, it could cost money. Oh. Yeah, so the question was about the cost to the homeowner and whether Excel would take on some of those costs. And ideally, the answer is yes, because especially with pilot projects, these are not fully proven. I mean, we know it's going to work, but it hasn't been tested out much over a lot of different places. There's a lot of different policies that will allow both the state and Excel to put some money and rebates into these projects and allow homeowners to have a reduced cost. How much that'll be, we don't know yet. Not satisfying, I understand. Well, I mean, I want to speak for him. I mean, is that what you were asking? Were you talking about Excel cost or homeowner? Getting your steps in.
Both, actually, but it was really initially focused on the Excel costs, because the way you made the presentation, my interpretation of what that was is that by abandoning gas lines, Excel is not going to have to expend money to maintain and build them, but that's one avoided cost. But then there could be new costs, such as greater, basically the greater electricity transmission locally, but also at individual hookups, like you're describing as a homeowner.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was. Or I can't. Oh,
Sorry if I missed it. Did you put some together some gross costs for this? And maybe I missed on the slides. Like how much per house would this investment cost? Down maybe to that granularity.
yeah, we have to. Sorry, he's talking before. Oh, I'm getting confused with all them. So for your comment first, that's why our team advocates to prioritize TINs, because with air source heat pumps, you're putting way more strain on the grid, especially during those peak times. But thermal energy networks, with their higher efficiencies, you're not straining the grid as much. The electricity use is way less because they're way more efficient. And then this is the data we have from the geothermal pilot in Framingham. Oops, sorry. So yeah, the upfront costs are pretty hefty. National Grid took on all of these costs. It's, I think, about 2 years since they finished construction. Maybe it's not even that long. So it remains to be seen, I think, with how this has affected the other ratepayers for that utility. But I think the good news is that that cost of gas that we have right there, anywhere between 1 to 10 million to replace 1 mile. This was 14 million for 1 mile, but it was also one of the first ones that we did. So I think if we keep up the learning curve, hopefully those costs will go down.
Okay. Just to follow that up, did you have a breakdown per house? I didn't quite see that right there, but for the investment costs. The reason I'm asking on myself and Neil, I think we did electrification for around 25 to 40,000 per house, or even less. Actually, I did it much less than that.
For this project or just in general?
Well, for that project.
For this one, oh wait, what did you say?
Oh, we don't.
30.
We don't have a per house number for this particular project. Energy Outreach Colorado, which is the industry they spend generally at least 20,000 a house on a whole house retrofit. But the thing you have to think about is, especially if the homes are old, they don't just require new appliances. You have to do energy efficiency, you have to do insulation. A lot of times you have to do mold remediation, lead remediation. A lot of times there's not even electric service to where the stove would go. So you have to put in new wiring. And like you had mentioned, a lot of those electric services are quite old and need to be upgraded. So the costs vary significantly. Those houses in Central Park that we looked at, the cost is going to be very low because those were built with sustainability in mind. They're super efficient and very modern. The houses in Westwood we looked at are going to be very expensive to retrofit. So there's a lot of variation in those costs.
So when you did your financial modeling, how can we calculate external costs?
That is a good question. Yeah.
Sorry.
We're giving you the hard ones, Lisa.
That is a really good question. Social and environmental costs are not easy to calculate, but you're going to have to look at like the amount of money you spend going to treat asthma, or like your hospital bills, and like how much you spend on health, or like how many people are affected in a neighborhood, the total cost of that. And so that is a huge number that I don't know how to, yeah. I don't know how to answer that really.
It's being the cost of the social cost of carbon.
It's the closest we found. I just don't know where another source would be other than that.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people doing that work. Those people are not us.
But it's a big number.
With a civil engineering background, I would say my comment there too on cost is, the Boulder flood of 2013, that was rated over 1,000-year storm. So storm sewers are built for a 5-year storm, and it's just not sustainable to build your infrastructure for a 1,000-year event. And you can't be having a 1,000-year event every 5 years. So by a 1,000-year event, by the way, to define it for people who don't know, is that would be an event that statistically or mathematically is likely to happen once every 1,000 years. And the Boulder flood of 2013 was rated over, I believe it was rated over 1,000-year flood. And so when you design all of our infrastructure, if you're looking at our storm sewers, all of our infrastructure, we cannot afford. I mean, I upgraded on a home, as far as the roof, right? Because of the hail, right? So there is a cost. There is a cost to all of them. So, yeah.
For those tenants, we typically owns and operates those.
Ownership. Yeah. Oh, we have a slide.
There's a lot of different ownership structures. So the local government can own it, or the utility can own it. So for example, Eversource is totally owned and operated by the private utility up in Massachusetts, but it really depends on where it is and how that partnership wants to come out. Yeah, so for the pilot projects that are going to happen here, if it's a thermal energy network, it'll probably be owned or co-owned by Xcel and CAS or City and County of Denver. But it sounds like it's probably leaning towards Xcel fully owning it, and then Denver being their partner in terms of the community outreach and getting residents on board.
You're gonna hang that up online, or you did.
Yeah. I'll make it up. For the folks out in Zoom, if you could type your questions out in the chat. We don't have a means for broadcasting your voice, so type your questions in the chat and they'll be read out loud.
The chat is disabled.
Can you please describe what subsidies or benefits there might be for geothermal for new build communities? Because I heard that something like in Colorado and Polis, I think, was like really promoting this. Like when you do community geothermal, it costs like 1/10 of what it costs to do an individual retrofit on a house for geothermal.
I mean, he's asking specifically about policies, and that's definitely your chance.
Oh. 1 second. Actually, I don't think I have the policy and the appendix. There are incentives. It seems like most of the geothermal incentives are not necessarily for new builds. They are really trying to emphasize the retrofitting just because that is so much harder. I feel like the geo exchange system at Colorado Mesa University has been something that the governor has like really supported and is trying to promote for across Colorado. So it seems like the emphasis is on like those district level thermal energy networks or geothermal systems instead of, at least until this bill, doing it at the neighborhood scale, not necessarily a university campus or something like that. I don't have the policies on top of my head though, so.
Made the right point about the incentive should go for individual household retrofits because that's where it's way more expensive. They should just have some regulatory guidelines in place to encourage new builds to do community-wide.
And there are some regulatory guidelines at place, at least in the city of Denver. I don't know if these are statewide, but the city and county of Denver is no longer allowing gas hookups for buildings over a certain size. So that's exciting. Yay! And I don't know the size off the top of my head.
I'm aware I'm asking a hard question. I'm asking because these questions are not easy to answer. You know where to obtain benchmarking information specifically at a granular level. I only know two sources available for that. One is Excel, and they're not talking.
So I'm considering getting a PhD in this. This is what I'm considering proposing as my research project because the data is not out there. And in order to know if these pilot projects are successful, we need to have data that's a starting point, and we don't have it. There's no, for example, statewide data on childhood asthma rates. It just doesn't exist. So how do we know if getting rid of household gas usage improves childhood asthma rates? We don't. But as far as benchmarking data, you guys think Energize Denver? Yeah. Energize Denver is only required for buildings, I believe, over 15,000 feet. There's a lower level threshold, and then buildings over 25,000 feet have more stringent requirements. And that data is publicly available.
Let's drop that. Yeah, I'll add that even though PG&E has a lot of problems, they have been good about sharing their data with municipalities and the communities that they're working with to do similar pilots like these ones. So hopefully Denver's able to advocate for the rest of the municipalities. There's 4 other ones that are part of this. So yeah, hoping Denver brings in the big guns with Vince and Dan, and they're able to advocate for that data sharing so there isn't that power imbalance that, well, I won't say that Excel prefers to have.
Thanks. I guess maybe I love what you're doing, appreciate it, and wanted to maybe more recommendation or food for thought. I'm sort of deeply backgrounded in the Energized Denver affordable housing space. One of the issues with taking larger buildings electric is that the property can't handle the adding solar panels or a geothermal thing, like on the property. And so they really need to figure out how to partner with some sort of farm or like co-op or a thing. So maybe there's something in here that you brought up, like the data center, but like take that to something where maybe we could fit a larger power source that feeds those kind of buildings who are in pretty tough straits to make these energy benchmarking requirements, things happen. So anyway, that's kind of an outside the box, hopefully just sort of thought. So thank you.
Can I introduce you to my Thank you. I mean, it's a really good point. It is very hard for a larger building. And it can be done. I think the thing that we need to realize is that these are not individual building problems. Like this is what, like this building that we're in right here, Odell's, if they were to attempt to electrify on their own, it would not be feasible for them. I'm getting agreement. Yeah. Yeah.
There are many there's some small group of building owners dealing with many buildings that need help.
And there are some people who push back against those energized Denver requirements and the, very like stringent goals that Denver has set, because they are very hard to reach. And what I would suggest to Denver, and maybe you guys can agree or not, is to say, and the state of Colorado, is to say, if you want these things to happen, you can't just hand a building a list of requirements and walk away. It's not, especially an equity building. You have to support them through that and give them resources and understand that if we want to meet these goals, it's not just about everybody for themselves, which is why we're talking about neighborhoods. And yeah. Anything to add? Yeah.
Your take-home flyers and brochures, are they available now? And if so, can I get one?
Unfortunately, no. Kaiser has a whole comms and engagement team that has to vet everything that we've created and make sure it meets all of their guidelines before it becomes public. So we kind of look at what we created as templates for them to pull what they like out of and use. But thank you. We hope so. Yeah. The other thing we had to, yeah.
And say, this is for feedback only.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Something we had to become comfortable with as we were going through this project is that these things happen so slowly. Oh, they happen so slow. Right. Yeah. We thought we'd be picking pilot projects.
We have a question in the audience, not audience, online in Zoom. Fran, I believe, asks, would it be possible to consider a partnership with a rooftop farm similar to the partnership of New York's rooftop farm of the Brooklyn Grange with the Navy's building? However, for powering a neighborhood block, the partnership could be with the rooftop of a grocery store or a department store within a neighborhood.
Just to clarify, are you referring to a rooftop food farm or a rooftop solar farm?
Fran, if you can clarify.
It's got a, yeah, it makes sense for it.
I guess we'll assume solar.
Food farm.
Food farm.
Yes.
Food farm.
Oh, interesting. I don't see why not. It sounds great. Yeah. Oh, Erin has more to say.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know if we studied the other case study we did was on the Eco Block project in Oakland, California. And they did the building by building electrification approach. And instead of just focusing on, I guess, switching from gas to electricity, they also included all these other climate resilience benefits as a part of the project, like green infrastructure, maybe food farms, but you can double check me on that. I'm actually not quite sure, but I think taking that approach and as a way to get more people on board is a really good idea. And the Eco Block project has been incredibly successful. So maybe that's something that Kaiser could, a lesson learned from them.
They did really good community.
Yeah.
I have a question concerning one of the slides. It was the New York project with the geothermal underneath the tall building. And one of the complaints was noise.
Yeah.
What's noisy?
So I don't know if you've ever been around a drilling project, but So they were drilling 300 plus 500-foot holes in the ground. And I would say the problem wasn't so much the actual noise, because that's going to happen in a project like this. There is absolutely no way to avoid it. But the problem was that they didn't let the neighbors know when to expect noise or when to expect it to end. So
I was gonna say, so it's not noisy when it's done, that just when you're building it, like
Yeah.
construction sites are, I would assume.
yeah, but it was like 2+ years of construction, and no real communication to the community about what it was going to look like. There were also some complaints about using non-union labor. There were some complaints about, like I said, the ferry closure, that there were worries about whether the local schools had enough space to accommodate that many new residents. There were a lot of things that could have been addressed with a robust community engagement and communication campaign.
Sorry, this is more just a comment, but I think that's a complaint across the board, even with solar development, is the community is not engaged early enough. And there's 400 trucks driving up and down the roads every single day, and there's dust and there's noise. And yeah, I think we need to learn how to engage communities early. And I go into these spaces and it's like, what are our lessons learned? Like, oh, we need to engage early. Well, how do we start engaging earlier? So yeah.
Hacking companies can tell you.
Anyway, that was just like a,
Yeah. I mean, going back to the EcoBlock project that Aaron was talking about, they did an opt-in model. So they didn't pick a community to work on. They put out basically a request for interest. And the community that was chosen was a community that actively chose to participate and really was very interested. And it was still hard. But yeah. I'm not sure where I was headed with that.
Yeah, I think Denver is still trying to figure out what level of community engagement they want to do with these pilots, since we're still in the very early stages. So you don't want to act like you're, I don't know, bringing them totally on board as if it's like a co-ownership model. If the reality is you're just going to tell them, hey, we're going to build a geothermal network here, and you need to agree. So we were unsure when we were doing our community engagement research what level they were going to be at, because you don't want to trick people into thinking they have more control than they actually do.
Yeah, that was a great question earlier about the noise. Because I was wondering that myself. I'm like, those other heat pumps are not that noisy, and they're underneath the ground, right? So, but going into the buy-in, I also think absolutely, there's no question in my mind, and being a person who's worked with, essentially voters, right, is that you're never going to get that kind of consensus where you get everybody on the block to agree on something. That's never ever going to happen. And so along those lines, I was wondering about the renters. Why are you approaching the renters and not the landlords? Because I'm not sure what the renter really is supposed to be doing here. I'm not sure if this is, yeah.
I think just having more awareness, because there is just such a high proportion of renters in Colorado, just like steps that they can take and advocate for themselves. Because even as we were distributing the surveys, a lot of people were like, I'm a renter. I don't even know if I can take the survey because I don't think I could even get involved. So just like knowing what steps you can take if you are interested in pursuing electrification. I think bigger picture is, yes, like landlords is probably the easier route to go to. But people should just be aware of like what steps that they can take if they want to get involved.
Yeah, Tom Online just wants to know who owned the geothermal loop in the New York City example.
So in the New York City example, that's owned by the developer who is renting those apartments out and ideally making a profit because rent in New York is ridiculous. Yeah, everything there is owned by the developer, and they received some incentive funding both for the geothermal system and for the affordable housing portion, but that was incentive funding. It's not ownership by the state. And just to go back to the renter question, I just want to point out that it's really an equity issue. And think about the people who are likely to rent their homes. They are people who can't buy a home. And we don't want to shut them out of these conversations. You know, we don't want to be going into their houses and changing them without their consent and without their understanding. And we really don't want landlords to be passing on, you know, they get a big incentive from Denver to upgrade their building. The building's value goes up, they raise people's rents. This is not okay. We want to make sure it's not happening. That's my soapbox.
No more questions? Well, thank you all very much.